What is a parable?
It's a story that a point across.
It's a story that's all you walk away with. It's okay. But it has deeper meanings and connotations as well. We talked about the seeds. We talked about all these different things. Last week, we had two parables. Anybody remember what they were? Yes, Christian. The question was, does anybody remember what two parables we talked about last week? Okay?
Well, I know we talked about the mustard seed already.
Already, that was a couple weeks ago. Last week we talked about the man who was in the field, and he found a treasure. So what did he do? He buried it back, took everything he owned, and bought that field. Then we talked about a pearl merchant, found an exceedingly rare and special pearl, sold everything he had joyfully for that one pearl. And we talk about that being the kingdom of God is like. And last week we mentioned the idea, is your kingdom of God worth getting rid of everything? Well, this week we have another one. In Matthew chapter 13, starting at verse 47, I love to hear Peaches Trussell. I also love to see people playing on their phone. If you're playing, Candy Crush, that's okay, just turn the volume down. Well, that's because it's on and it'd be distracting. Okay? And I think I played it for a week and I didn't hear the word. That's me. But I'm going to assume that you're looking up the word. Matthew chapter 13, starting at verse 47. Once again, he's really hammering this one home, folks. He's talking to the people. Now, many of the people back then were uneducated formally, but a number of them had very deep spiritual and business-related experience. They didn't get away with being influencers. They didn't get away with being, they had to produce. He says, once again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net let down into the lake. Now, I want you to see the picture. How many of you have driven past the shore and seen fishing boats? Some of you may have a boat that you use for fishing. Down in Cape May, I know some people who use the big fishing boats. Okay? And those boats, some of them put out hundreds of feet of net. Then you have the guys with the commercial fishing boats, and they want to drop their line and snag them up because then they cut it off and retie you for $10 $10 a line. They hope you do it 6 or 7 times above the cost of the charter boat. But in this case, he's talking about something that everybody sees. It's something that if you're by the shore in Israel, you still see fishing boats. They don't go out very far. They don't go out past view of land. But the fish come in. So he says the kingdom of heaven is like a net, which everybody knows what a net looks like, let down into a lake. And it catches all kinds of fish. Well, I got to tell you, with fishing the way it is right now, just letting your net down in the lake, you're not typically going to get all kinds of fish. In fact, some of you have fished and you've told me you go fishing regularly, and many times you get stumped.
Yeah, well,
Huh?
that's one of my stories.
So here's the thing. We've also learned from other parts of the gospel message that Jesus told Peter, let down your net after he'd been out all day. He brought him in, he was cleaning the net because a net with salt water will rot. You have to wash it down with fresh water. And after all that, he's got it almost clean. He says, okay, take it back out. but we fished all night. That's okay, put it on the other side of the boat. Somebody said 20 foot away from the fish. But in this case, it says they let it down and they caught all kinds of fish. How many of you know there's different kinds of fish?
Yeah.
Lisa and I grew up in Cape May on the way into Wildwood. On the right-hand side, just outside of town, there used to be what we called the fish factory. And the fish factory was where they took bunker. How many of you heard of a fish called bunker? Menhaden. That's its technical name. Well, menhaden is a very oily, greasy fish. And it stinks. And as you fish, they come in huge schools. In fact, how they catch it is they send an airplane out and they see these balls of fish, thousands and tens of thousands, and then all the boats come in and grab them up, okay, with their nets. But the fish factory took all these bunker, menhaden, and they would grind them up for their oil. How many of you smell fish oil? How many of you smell cod liver oil? Okay, huh? Boy, I'm taking some people back on this trip, aren't I? But here's what I want you to understand. The fish factory always smelled like that. I can remember being a kid and my parents blindfolded me because they were taking me to dinner for a surprise on the island of Wildwood. And I was like, I don't have it. And they took me from my house. They did a couple zigzags. I was young. And then we drove down that road and I went, oh, we're going to Wildwood. And Dad goes, how do you know? It's a fish factory. I made a U-turn. You turned out and went in back into Wildwood a different way. But it's knowledgeable. When the fish was full, the fishermen pulled it up on the shore. So what they did was, it was so full that they couldn't bring it up into the boat. What they had to do was, they had to bring it in close to shore. A couple of the fishermen jumped out into waist-deep, shoulder-deep water, pulled the net in, and then a couple other guys got the other side and pulled it in and pulled it up to shore. And they would use the shore as their break. Well, once you have all these fish on shore, and some of them are bunker, some of them are flounder, some of them are shark, what do you do with them? See, here's the other part of it. A lot of people don't realize this or know this, but part of it is it depends on the size and other factors of the fish. You get a premium price for some fish. How many of you know you get a premium price for the biggest and the freshest? Okay? A tuna like a bluefish like this will get you a better price than a bluefish like this. Because the older it gets, the oilier it gets. The oilier? Okay, I can do that. My tongue doesn't work that way. But here we go. The more oily it gets, and it's not as nice. So the small ones are better than the bigger ones. Now, if you talk about flounder, the doormat flounder are worth a lot more than the little guys. And forget all the government regs. They didn't have these back then. So he pulls all these fish in, and then they sit down and they collect the good fish in baskets. See, the fish they can make money on, the fish that are worthy and worth something, they put in the basket. Where is that going? That's going to the market. That's going to the supplier. That's going to fish markets all around the area. Now remember, in Bible days, they didn't have refrigeration. Okay? So it's not like they were sending it to Chicago. They didn't have a way to. But what they did was, the junk fish, the fish that they couldn't send, and I'm going to tell you a personal thing here, I like bluefish, even with the greasiness of it. My uncle won't touch them. But the ones that none of us have really had any luck with, there's two. Pufferfish and sea robins. We catch them all the time. But there's not a whole lot you can do with a sea robin. Okay, well, yeah, they throw it back and then they make more sea robins instead of good fish. But he's saying what they did was they took the good fish and they put them in a basket for use. The not so good fish, it says they threw them away. Now, how many of you heard that story now? How many of you are sitting here going, that makes sense? Yeah, if I went fishing and I caught a sea bass and a sea robin, I keep the sea bass. I get rid of the sea robin. I keep the flounder. I don't like bluefish, I'll get rid of them. See, that's all normal, isn't it? But now Jesus shifts to the deeper part of the story. This is how it will be at the end of the age. Matthew chapter 13, verse 49. This is how it will be at the end of time. See, what he started out with, the kingdom of heaven is like. How many of you know the kingdom of heaven is now? How many of you know most people think the kingdom of heaven is yet to come? How many of you know people like that? Oh, when I die, I'll have heaven in the great by and by in the sky. Right? But the kingdom of God is now, and he wants them to understand that because they were doing the same thing. There were Pharisees who believed in an afterlife, there were Sadducees who didn't, and he was trying to say the kingdom of God isn't just what's going to happen in the future, it's here, but it's also what happens in the future. This is how it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come and separate the wicked from the righteous. Now, I want you to think about that for a minute. How many of you can look at somebody and know they're wicked? Honestly? You can see some of their actions. But the average person, can you tell if they're good or bad? How many of you know the average person has good and bad? How many of you know the average Christian has good and bad? How many of you know the average pastor has good and bad? Pastor, you would say that? Yes. Because you know what? The Lord's not done working on me either. How many of you are glad the Lord's not done working on you? Yeah. How many of you are really glad the Lord's not done working on me? Okay. Yes, I said that on purpose that way. Okay. We can't know how God's working in somebody else's heart. There's some people that looks like they never change. And then all of a sudden, something will pop out. I've used this story before, but I have to use it again. I pastored my first church. I pastored a man named Don. Didn't come to church. Didn't want anything, to my knowledge, didn't want anything to do with God. His wife was going, Pastor, pray for my husband. He's gone to hell. Pray for my husband. So all of a sudden, he had a heart attack, and they called the pastor. And I went out and I talked to Don. And Don started coming to church. And Sunday nights, I'd ask people to pray. And Don wouldn't, no, sir, Pastor, I don't talk in public. Nope, not going to pray. And I'm okay with that. Some people don't like to speak in public. And then one night I had popcorn prayer. Everybody goes popcorn prayer, right? One sentence, then somebody else gets to go. You can go as many times as you want, but there's got to be one person between you or more. He prayed 15 times. 15 times. I went up to him and said, Don, what are you doing? I said, you told me a month ago that you couldn't pray. Well, Pastor, anybody can say one sentence. Okay. Then after that, one time he actually came out of the blue and prayed for the service. And he walked up and said, Pastor, can I pray for this service? You're done. By the way, that is his real name and he's in glory now, okay? At the end of the age, the angels, not you and me, not any human being, the angels who are direct messengers of God, who get their message from God and don't mistake it. Because if they mistake it, we have a different word for them. They're called demons. All the angels who disobeyed got thrown out of heaven. But the angels, the righteous of God's messengers, will come down, separate the wicked from the righteous, and throw them into the blazing furnace. Boy, heaven has fallen out of favor, hasn't it? See, if you really thought about it, if you really thought what you were doing, if people really thought what they were doing, the furnace was never made for human beings. Now, we're coming up to Halloween, right? How many know there's going to be people who dress as the devil?
Yeah.
How many know there's going to be people who glorify hell? How many of you know there's people who are going to turn around and act like, well, I want to go to hell because all my friends are there? If they really knew what hell was, they wouldn't be that glib about it, I guarantee you. If they really knew what the fiery furnace was for and about, it is only made for Lucifer and the rebellious angels. It was never made for you and me. God never made it for you and me or anybody. Think of the worst human being you've ever known or read about. Do you have a picture of them? Everybody got a picture? Take that person and recognize God never made hell for them or anybody else. Satan tricked them into rebelling against God the same way he rebelled, and they get the same punishment. People don't fall into hell. People walk in by their own decisions. Let me make that real clear. And their decision has to be to reject God and Jesus Christ. He says, by the way, I better back up here. Not only does Satan trick people into going to hell, God's tree is heaven. Think about it for a minute. Just as hell is worse than anybody can imagine. I cringe. And I've heard people, oh, go to hell. I cringe at that. You have no idea what you're telling somebody to do. Think about it for a minute. You really want that person in hell? In hell? At the same time, like we said earlier, heaven is so much greater and above anything we can imagine. It's going to be a bigger treat than we know. Throwing the angels will throw the wicked into the furnace, and there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. They'll be weeping because all of a sudden some of those that got tricked are going to go, what the heck? How's that work? What did I really do that was that bad? I was just like all my friends. Easy, you rejected God. You rejected his payment for sin, Jesus. And the gnashing of teeth, that's where you're like nipping at each other. Our dog, Nala, gets so excited when people come to the door that it looks like she's going to bite their heads off. No, she's just happy to see it, but you can't tell people that when she's gone. Now he says all these things. He's changing people's views, and he's saying all this so that they walk in knowing what they're doing. How many of you know in most situations people don't have a clue what they're really doing? How many of you know in 2 weeks when they go into the voting booth, the vast majority of people aren't really going to have half a clue? They're going to go because the influencer told them, the TV media told them, their family told them.
And they're going out now, we're only voting.
Said by the person who's going to vote this afternoon. By the way, I'm going to tell you.
Hour and a half wait yesterday.
Hour and a half wait yesterday.
It's only 40 for us.
How long?
40.
This morning.
Yeah, we went first thing.
You know what? That's why, forget political parties, forget all of that. That's why I say, learn as much about the candidate and then pray. And take God in the voting booth with you. Not just on the election candidates, but on the questions too. Okay? Now, I'm not going there because I'm in the pulpit. I am going to say this. I have a very strong opinion on windmills offshore. Okay, that was just a total sidebar. But after he talks about heaven and hell, after he talks about the fish coming in, after he talks about separating the good from the bad, he turns to the crowd and he says, now, you understand? After 3 weeks of talking, 4 weeks of talking about parables, about the seed, and about the mustard seed, and about the pearl, and about the field, and about all those things, and about all of that being about the kingdom of heaven. Do you get it? Now, how many of you would feel kind of insulted after hearing 6 stories about to have the same focus, and then being told, now, do you get it? See, some of you, if you're being honest and you say that, then you should have raised your hand and been offended, and I have. But what he's saying is this. You can hear all this stuff and still not get it. And the crowd did what they always say. How many of you know that when you get a crowd together? Now, for those of you who are mine, one of our youngest attendees has just shown up, and he wanted to make sure Pastor Will knew he was there. Hi, Ryan. I'm talking about Jesus. What are you doing? You're sitting here, good man. So here's what I want you to see. Most of the crowd in any given situation, if you throw something out there and say, do you get it? They're going to go, yeah, yes. Right? I get it. The truth is, Jesus has told all these parables so that it's clear where we're at. What is the kingdom of heaven? Totally different than what we understand. What is the kingdom of heaven? The place for the righteous that is worth losing everything for. What is heaven? The place where all groups come together, but only the righteous get to stay there. Bless you. And he finishes it with this. After they said yes, Jesus had one final closing sentence. He says to them, every teacher of the law who has become a disciple in the kingdom of heaven. I want you to think about that for a minute, because there's more to unpack to that. How many of you heard that and you made a question? How many of you got a question out of that? How many of you just said, okay, that makes sense? Anybody just say it makes sense? Here's what I want you to think about. Every teacher of the law. What is a teacher? What's a teacher in general? John, you married one. What is a teacher? Oh. Pretend that didn't go over there. A teacher is one who has mastered a subject and is given to giving that information to others. Isn't it?
Sure.
Isn't the teacher supposed to know more about the subject than the student?
Sometimes the teacher is somebody who wasn't good enough to be a master, so he became a teacher.
That's true.
We'll look at them as the exception. Okay. Jesus said, every teacher of the law, what would get people into heaven at this time? The law. Jesus hadn't died on the cross. Jesus hadn't paid their price for sin. So getting into heaven was by following all 613 biblical laws. And there were people who were specialists in that law. They're the teachers, the Pharisees. Every teacher of the law, everyone who's an expert at the rules to keep, who then becomes a disciple. What does disciple mean?
Following Jesus Christ.
Follower or student? So in other words, once you know all the laws and you quote them and follow them in your sleep, if you become a disciple of the kingdom of heaven. The laws are good, but the kingdom of heaven is bigger than these laws. The kingdom of heaven is, you get there, and all of a sudden you know what you don't know. How many of you did a lot of training and you did a lot of studies, but once you got on the actual job, you had a whole new education. Isn't that true?
Very true.
I worked in a machine shop when I was a kid, when I was in college, and my boss used to say it this way. He'd say, "It's what's not on page 42 that you really have to know."
And the book went to 40.
He says, this teacher, the master of the rules, who becomes the student of the kingdom, is like the owner, and this is his own little parable here, it's like the owner of a house who brings out of the storeroom new treasures as well as old treasures. And the whole group went, what? See, once you get past all the do's and don'ts, and you start making kingdom life your life, when you devote yourself to kingdom life, you still have all the old treasures. And I'm going to tell you, I am a firm believer, and Harry, our praise team, worship team group, he'll tell you, I've said it to him a dozen times. I love the old hymns, and I love the new choruses. They're the treasures, old and new. Because I'm going to tell you, right now, last week I was in a hard situation for myself, and one of the old-time hymns came floating back. Another time, I was in a hard time, and a new chorus came through. Which one was right? Both. But when you move from being going to heaven just to escape hell, to being a disciple of the kingdom of God, you're bringing in the treasures from both ends. How many have some really great family heirlooms? How many of you are planning that if the Lord tarries for the next 100 years, to give a legacy to your family? Both work. The teacher of the law of the old ways, when they become a student of the kingdom of heaven, not just the new ways. Because in our world today, they throw out the old ways and they replaced it not with God's way, but with everything but. And I'm going to finish it with this verse, which most of you should know. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added. In other words, once you seek first the kingdom of God, not just the kingdom of God, but his righteousness in your life, then everything else falls in place. Dear Lord, we close this time with you. We've got a lot of parables. And Lord, there's one more left. But Lord, for this one, help us to recognize that in every stage of our life, you've given us rules to live by for both the common good of humans and to be in good relationship with you. But Lord, help us to recognize that we also live under the freedom of Jesus Christ and the grace he gives. Not grace to do evil, but grace to be good. And Lord, help us to bring out the old treasures and the new. We ask all these things in your holy